Hello and welcome to Business on the Wire. I'm Mitali Mukherjee. A massive leak of documents was published by several major news organizations across the world that allegedly tie world leaders to secret stores of wealth. The names include King Abdullah of Jordan, associates of Russian President Vladimir Putin, Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan, and here in India, names like Reliance ADAG's boss Anil Ambani, cricketer Sachin Tendulkar, the sister of fugitive jeweler Nirav Modi, and the husband of Biocon's founder Kiran Mazumder Shaw. The records include an unprecedented amount of information on so-called beneficial owners of entities registered in the British Virgin Islands, in Seychelles, Hong Kong, Belize, Panama, South Dakota, and other secrecy jurisdictions. They also contain information on the shareholders, directors, and officers. The Pandora Papers investigation has involved more than 600 journalists from across many media outlets in over 100 countries. Joining me now to talk about the key findings for India is P. Vaidyanathan Iyer. He's Executive Editor National Affairs at the Indian Express, which is the media organization that broke this story here in India. Vaidi, thank you for joining in and speaking with me. I want to set some context for the persons watching. So why don't you walk us through the background of the investigations first for Pandora?
Yeah, I think, as we said that this started pretty early, almost like, 1.5, 2 years back.
Yeah.
And the first initial information that we had was like, we worked only on Mossack Fonseca for Panama Papers, but this was like, 14 different offshore service holders. So we were kind of taken aback with the enormity of the data or dump that we are dealing with. And we were wondering whether, it would come in batches or it would come as one dump. But then, of course, it didn't come the whole lot in one dump. It did come in a little bit. Some bits came in later. But once all of it came, then we started, diving deep and trying to figure out how many Indians. And there were some, in terms of technology also, the tools that they provide, that ICIJ kind of had, were different. So it helped us in terms of, say, for instance, if we had to figure out if there are politicians or not. So you could draw up a list of 200, 300, 500, like the entire Lok Sabha or the Rajya Sabha or the legislative assemblies of all states, put it in one Excel sheet and load it for a batch search.
Okay.
So the whole thing could be searched and they would, alert which
it would
are the
draw all
ones.
the names that you were
So,
looking for.
exactly. So that made things a little easy. So you don't have to search one by one. Because when you say India in a search, British Virgin Islands,
Indian
many
Ocean,
things,
yeah.
come up. Indiana Police also comes up. So
Yeah.
it becomes very difficult for you to search. So this batch search helped, like,
Yeah.
in figuring out exact names.
Were you also taken aback by the kind of names that came up? Because there's a standard set that one would expect. For example, there would be politicians in the mix, but this
Yeah.
time there's sports persons.
Yeah.
There's corporates that you would not have heard of otherwise, and then
Yeah.
there's a lot of security
Yeah.
enforcement names as well.
Yeah. So yeah, because the variety was what really struck us. Though now I wouldn't say that there are too many names of that, but even one or two names in establishments of power and in sensitive areas within the government of people who had links with sensitive positions in the government. So that really surprised us. Like the military person whom we have today in the newspaper, or we have some more which are coming, or even say the kind of people that have come, say for instance a Kiran Mazumder Shaw. It surprised us because these are people who are also reputed in their own way. They have had a very clean record, and they have been say holders of public conscience, so to say. So those were names were surprising to us, and then also the sports person was very surprising. An actor thrown away is also surprising, but actors were there earlier, sports persons were not there. So somebody with a Bharat Ratna being there, it really takes you aback. Like, why would a Bharat Ratna be setting up a offshore entity? So legal or illegal is, I can come to that later on. But the variety kind of really surprised us, and there were of course lots of people who were on the radar of the investigating agencies, CBI, ED, Income Tax Department. So there were these people whom one would expect, they may be there.
Sure.
But surprisingly, politicians are not that. So I think, to my mind, that's a separate story one has to do at some point of time. That it surprises that why are Indian politicians not there? So many people raise these questions also to us, as if somebody is trying to hide something, which is crazy and bizarre. These names are all put out in public domain by ICIJ itself in due course. So I'm sure that if there are politicians, if there is corruption, if there are other ingenious ways to hide money, that's what I would think
that
about
haven't been
corruption.
found yet.
That's an in-house investigation that Express has to do. Yeah.
I want to take on some of those points that you raised, Vaidhi, because, and I'm playing the devil's advocate over here,
Certainly.
right? Having an offshore company is not illegal.
Yeah.
It is permitted in India.
Yeah.
For some of the names named, they have pointed out that they paid their taxes and they did their due diligence.
Yeah.
So tell me what your investigation is trying to indicate.
Yeah.
What are the 1 or 2 or 3 things that you want to indicate by the presence of these offshore funds for these names?
Yeah. See, there are couple of things, Mitali. One is, when you say that offshore entities, everything is legal, that is the starting point of the problem, right?
That's why it's grey.
That is why it is grey. So if the problem is that these are legal, but there are loopholes in the system which the rich, the famous, the notorious, they kind of exploit, because they are the people who have the resources to hire the best of talents, the best of CAs, the best of wealth managers. They are the people who try to find and tell them what are the ways by which you can avoid taxes, if not evade taxes. They are the people who are telling them you can avoid taxes by doing this, that there are better tax efficient ways in which you can take your money out. So one is that aspect where I'm saying that these are legal, but there is a huge moral and ethical issue there. Should we be using offshore entities without adequate disclosures? So to my mind, one key thing is disclosures.
Right.
The second aspect is, why are these offshore companies set up? Because there might be 5 people who are doing it for estate planning exactly, but there are 15 other people who are doing it to evade creditors, to evade the taxman, and create this veil of huge secrecy in their operations, where you are trying to mask and hide your identities from the rest of the world. So I would split it in 2 categories. So while we can say that the guys who are doing this, the second part, that there is a huge gray area in this, that there are question marks in that, where, say for instance, say Pramod Mittal's report today, where he owes probably $1 billion or $1 billion to creditors, and then he says that I already owe something else, like say a couple of million, hundreds of $1 million to one company, and in another company the residence which is given to another company. He says that because of these reasons I don't have money. But then when you see that the trust that he has set up, or the investment vehicles that he has set up for these two, he himself is a beneficiary. He becomes his own creditor, he becomes he's the owner and he's also the creditor. So which is a very strange, bizarre thing to happen. So these are things which never come out in public domain. So these are well-heeled, reputed people in the industry.
I want to talk about some of these trends that you noticed through Pandora as well. But there was another thing that struck me, which is that there were so many ultimate beneficial owners this time round, even if you compare it with what you found in the the Panama Papers. What was the process towards getting that? And this time round, was it easier, or was it far clearer that you could pinpoint what was happening to an individual?
So yeah, because trusts are a very complex structure. You can have a specific purpose trust, and then it has its own company which is a shareholder in another trust which is a family trust, and then you have a trustee for that, you have a settler, and there are, at the bottommost layer are, dozen odd investment companies in which assets are parked. Different assets could be property, could be, shareholdings, could be cash,
Yeah.
and, short term funds. So and in each of this it becomes difficult because, these are layers. So, when you say that, okay, there is this investment company, offshore entity, which is registered in, say, Mauritius, who's the owner? The owner is another company. So then you find out, this owner, probably the shareholder, is one nominee director, put up by Asia City or, Alcogal. Then you are trying to find out, okay, who's this trustee, whether he is related to this trust or not. The trustee is something which, which Asia City appoints on its own. Then, that is a company in which a shareholding is held by, a nominee company of Asia City. This is a very complex manner in which this trust are set up. So when there is a tool in our, in this investigation called Linkurious.
Okay.
So it's a very interesting tool. When you enter a name into Linkurious, it says, okay, this guy's registered address is this guy is a director in this guy is a shareholder in this, and this is the company. The company's, trustee is this. So when I put one name, so for instance, if I put a story which has been reported today of, say, Gaurav Burman, who belongs
Okay.
to the Burman family, the
Yeah.
fifth generation Sion. Of course, he's a British citizen. He's not an Indian citizen, so to say. But then you see there are some 150 or 200, 250 nodes which are popping up for Gaurav Burman in various, he has got 13 offshore entities, he's got a trust, then his wife and his mother are there, part of some trust. So it is like a huge thing.
Complex.
So unraveling it becomes a very difficult job because all information is also not available.
Yeah.
So the problem is that we have selective information. So to construct stories out of selective information is a very, very laborious task. So if it's a 2-year investigation, it just requires that, you look at so many other sources of data points to just get to one story. So I think that is something unique about this trust mechanism, the trust structures in this investigation. The other very interesting trend we find is how corporates, how promoters of big companies are giving personal guarantees to loans being taken by their companies.
Yeah.
So if I am, say, hypothetically, if I am, say, Mr. Roy, so I am a promoter of a company which is, XYZ Limited. So this XYZ Limited has taken a loan of, 2,000 crores
Yeah.
from several banks put together. And since this company probably doesn't have that kind of assets, and this promoter has huge personal assets, he has given a guarantee to this company, and that has been able to borrow from, half a dozen banks. But when this company defaults, this gentleman who's a promoter has already parked all his assets in a trust.
So he's not liable.
He's not liable because, the trust gives you that insulation or cover on all the risks that you take on the business side, which is what a solid trend that we are finding in this, which is Mittal, which is Ambani, which is there are more who are coming in this. The other interesting trend we find is there are n number of NRIs,
Yeah.
and more
I
NRIs.
just want to labor on this one a little bit because
Yeah.
this is the interesting one,
Yeah.
really, where a lot of the names are folks, as you suggested, that are indicted or named in economic offences as we speak.
Yeah.
Most of their companies are
Yeah.
either declared bankrupt or
Yeah.
there is, some kind of creditor issue that lies outstanding.
Yeah.
And you're saying that there is this whole cache of funds that they are simply not accessing, but for some of these names they have actually gone to court, have they not, saying I don't have the funds to repay my creditors.
Exactly. If you look at, what Mr. Ambani said in a London court,
Yeah.
suggests something like that. He has got some, the some $720 odd million which he owes to, I think up to 3 Chinese banks.
Chinese banks, yeah.
But then he has set up, and he has said that, I don't have any money. And then he has set up, several offshore entities, 18 of them at least that we know of, which are, undertaking lots of, activities of investments or, borrowings and stuff like that. So whether these offshore entities have assets. So even the
And what is the value of the assets that you found?
I think it was over $1 billion, if I'm not wrong. And then, interestingly, then, you ask Mr. Ambani these questions, and he gives, responses, whatever he has given in the newspaper. But then, at least you are telling people who are supposed to do, investigate, because we are not investigators, so to say, because no law is not in our hands, so we can only point to certain directions. So our investigation ends, then it is for the taxman to take note of that. So I think then you see that these are offshore entities are entities which have got assets, and they have got their own liabilities also. I'm sure that they are borrowing, they are investing. But then the court says that we are not sure whether he has disclosed all his offshore entities, or the court says, like, I'm not sure whether there are more offshore entities or less offshore entities. So I think this offshore mechanism provides you that hazy background to hide entities.
But it's an interesting point you raise, Vedi, because that's the thing. I mean, the court is saying, look, we are not sure. But there is someone who can ascertain this,
Yeah,
right? There is
yeah,
the investigating agency that
yeah,
can go forward and say, let's see more details about your offshore funds,
yeah.
which has simply not happened.
No, I'll tell you one more thing, Mitali. To be, I don't want to say that nobody holds brief for anybody, but when I speak to, say, since I've been a finance ministry correspondent for 20 years now,
Two
when
decades. Wait,
two
2 decades.
decades, 2 decades. So when I talk to tax officials, and even in our Panama Papers investigation, we found then when letters are sent by the income tax department in India to say a financial investigative agency in, say, BVI or Panama, the to and fro that happens is not a joke. For 2 years, the tax department is continuously sending them reminders, tell me who are the beneficial owners, tell me whether this offshore entity has a bank account, what is the address of the bank account, who are the names under whom these bank accounts have opened, or who is the shareholder of this particular entity. For everything they give answers. So what happens is, like, when somebody says, okay, there is so and so company, who are the shareholders of this BVI entity? So the guy in 3 months or so, the BVI's financial investigating agency, it gets in touch with the offshore service provider. It says, there is a query from India, so please give us the information. And that offshore entity takes its own time to give, the service provider takes its own time to give information and pass it on to India. So what comes here is another two companies which are, say, based in Mauritius, and you are again back to square
Round
one,
and round in
getting in
circle.
touch with Mauritius, saying that, boss, tell me who are the people behind this. So while it is for me to sit in the office and say, boss, it should happen like that, why is it taking 3 years, 4 years? Panama Papers happened 2016, it's 21 now, 5 years have passed, and 1,500, 1,600 crores only has been realized.
Yeah.
So there is an issue there. Yeah.
I hear you. The observation also seems to be, Vedi, that there is a kind of a pre-Panama and post-Panama modus operandi
Yeah.
for for
Yeah.
many of these names that you found. What are the key differences that you noticed? First, let me address that part first, and then I'll ask you my next
So
question.
3 or 4 reasons which I think in the last 10 years people have, besides just, I think estate planning has been happening in India for ages. We have our own laws for trusts, and people do set up trusts in India also, and Indian laws also recognize that offshore trusts can be set up. So that is one part. The other part is, in the last 10 years we have seen, or even in the last 7 years I would say, that companies are setting up more and more trusts, offshore trusts. There is one thing which is, when I speak with lots of people who are in the business of providing such services to Indian businesses, so they tell me that there is this huge pervasive fear in the corporate sector that there is this inheritance tax or estate duty that we used to have till 1985 is going to come back.
Okay.
So I said, why is this fear? So they say that, if you recall that, even in 2015-16 budget, Arun Jaitley actually did away with the inheritance tax. We had an inheritance tax as well, which was 1% of the net wealth, which is called the wealth tax.
The wealth tax. Yeah.
So which was a wealth tax, and it was 1% of all amounts over 30 lakh rupees, and they used to realize something like 1,000 crores in that. So he said that, I'm doing away with this because, he didn't do away with this because he didn't want to tax the wealth of the rich. He did away with it because the cost of administering, or cost of getting this wealth tax 1,000 crores was probably much higher than what they are realizing. So he did away with that, but then he put a 2% surcharge on the super rich, which was like 1 crore and above of income. So he made it a point to say that, all other mechanisms to find out who, to basically see that the rich are taxed, will be in place. Like, we will track them, we will look at their foreign assets, blah, blah, blah. And then we had the Black Money Act, which also said that, Indians having anything to do with, if they are a settler of a trust or if they are a trustee, blah, 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 then you have to have a foreign asset schedule. You have to declare all your assets outside. But this fear of estate duty, that, the rich may be taxed, because, we are living in an, unequal world, right, Mitali? And COVID has accentuated those problems today. Yeah. So, there is the gap between the rich and the poor has widened. And any government, political government, might just find it a tool to say that, boss, for redistribution, I have to tax the rich more. And what is the best way to do that? It is to do a wealth tax. It is to do an estate duty tax. At least intergenerational parity is brought about by taxing the wealth of people who are deceased, and that wealth is passed on to the next generation. I think that is one fear. Why I am seeing a lot of people setting up offshore trusts. Why are they doing offshore trusts? Because offshore trusts gives you certain advantages. Like, if the taxman has to prove that you moved to offshore just because you thought that you will be taxed immediately, and you set up an offshore entity. But if you do it in 10 years in advance, thinking that it might happen sometime, so the taxman doesn't have that much of leeway. The second thing is, of course, more and more Indian businesses having one member as an NRI.
Right.
That is a super story which, I see. Because if you are an NRI, you're not supposed to disclose anything to the taxman. You can become the trustee, settler, you can become anything of an offshore trust. And it is very difficult to figure out whether the income from this trust is being generated out of business operations in India or assets in India. So I think that is something which is coming out very clearly.
Would you say, Vedi, compared to the Panama Papers, which as well, you were a part of, when you look at what you found in Pandora, there is far more watertight information for investigating agencies to actually go down that path and take this up more seriously, because it's not just Chinese banks. Many of these names owe thousands of crores to financial entities in India.
India as well. Absolutely. I think there is a lot of information for the taxman to build up evidences for taking concrete action. So, otherwise the taxman can never do a survey or a search operation unless he has concrete information. He can't go around fishing. So this, I'm certain, gives them a lot of circumstantial evidence which suggests that probably there is need to look at it in good detail.
What's also not interesting, rather I would say disturbing in your findings, is that a lot of the names are or head organizations or institutions that you think will be the firewall to prevent this kind of thing from happening. But instead what you found was that they were very much party to this offshore setting up and, shifting your funds overseas as well.
Yeah, see, any time a lawmaker or a government, we have more reports coming up. So I'm unable to speak at this moment who are those guys, but certainly they are the guys who are supposed to be the gatekeepers. They are supposed to be the people who are stopping, who should be stopping such activities taking place, but they are the people who are getting involved and taking advantage of all the expertise that they had when they were in service, which is very big issue, because we all know that in India the system is such that bureaucrats or anybody who retires continues to kind of exercise influence, because he has worked with so many people who are still in service. So I would not say that they are working in collusion, but I am saying that this raises questions of propriety. It raises questions whether we are able to make laws with as much conviction as it requires when it comes to stopping such activities.
If you were to slice up the pie in terms of areas from where you found these names coming, would the largest section be corporate India?
Yeah, a large section would be corporate India.
And within that, would the largest subsection be those who have either defaulted or are in the process of defaulting
I
on?
think so. They are a lot of them are in the process of defaulting. They have given personal guarantees to their companies on loans taken by those companies, and they have moved away funds from India and put it in offshore entities.
And at this point, because as you said, you have known the ministry side for a long time, Vedi, have you received any preliminary inquiries about what is your investigation about? Can you share more details? We're interested to know more
Yes,
about. You have.
but we generally don't share anything.
Okay.
Generally, as a matter of fact, we don't
We
share
don't.
anything because we are not supposed to share anything with them, because that is a written commitment to ICIJ, that taxman has to find his own ways to do it. I am not a
You're just shining the torch.
he's just
Yeah.
yeah, lifting the veil or kimono, as you'd say.
Which one was the most surprising? If you haven't, or are you still pending release with that one?
No, two were very surprising to us. One was, of course, Director General of Military Intelligence,
Yeah.
who's been named today, 6 years after retirement, who is tried to set up an offshore entity and also has opened up a bank account. So he can say nothing happened, but it is surprising, big surprise for us. The other surprise was also Kiran Mazumder Shaw and Anil Ambani. Anil Ambani is surprising because he has a legacy. He entered into several businesses. He entered into defense business as well, and his companies are not in the best of shape.
To put it mildly.
Yeah.
Just one final question to you, Vedi. There is a point of criticism that's been raised about investigations such as these, not just this, that now the focus for investigative journalists has turned towards, and they call it data dump journalism, which is that I found all this data and I'm presenting it without enough context and perhaps pointing fingers where there may not be any need to. I want to give you the opportunity to sort of reflect on what you and your team did and whether you believe that this was indeed a data dump journalism moment.
It is very easy for somebody to sit outside and say what journalism should be and what journalism shouldn't be, right? There are people who are out there on social media, you know, just spitting outside doors of people, and you can't say anything to them because by the time you open the door, that fellow has scooted. But the point about data journalism is it requires huge effort. It requires huge resources. Very few organizations today have the courage, one, to devote those kind of resources, and second, to put those kind of people, senior resources, the time and space and money that you spend on this is huge. Like, you can put a number to that. It requires, as you said, it requires all this data to be put in context. You have to look at a 30-year time frame to look at businesses to find out what has happened with these 5 documents or 100 documents. So it is huge effort that goes into it. But I would also say that, while this is one aspect of journalism which, I would love to be involved in again and again, the other aspect is also the kind of journalism we all require to do, which is in-house investigation,
Yeah.
which is investigation by, like, Santosh Singh Patna's investigation on Nal Pe Jal scheme,
Yeah.
where he's gone to 20 districts to find out who are the people who have been given contracts. He's tapped at 100 doors to find out the companies which have bid, who are the owners of these companies, and then from that bulk of information to find that there was a deputy chief minister whose daughter-in-law was having a company which was getting, which got 2-3 contracts. So that is also journalism, that is also data journalism, but that is not a data dump journalism. It requires collection of data, which I think, you cannot say this is good or that is good, but both have to be done and both require effort, huge effort. So I think all of us, I would imagine that, to diss any journalism as, data dump and working on it, it requires huge effort, and we have to do our own stuff also, where we put in all our efforts. Our hands are getting dirty, our legs are, tired, roaming around districts in various parts of the country.
And of course, the important question of whether something may be legal, but does it sort of fit the moral or ethical compass, or does it veer into the grey again and again?
Yeah, so I'm so quickly reminded of what the then US President Barack Obama said on 5th April 2016, immediately after the Panama Papers. He said, so everybody knows that it is legal, but that is the problem, because the ordinary people are going through the rigors of filing their tax returns, paying their taxes through TDS every month. They are salaried people going through, living off what the
All the
government
loops
does
that
for
the
them.
government expects them to. Yeah.
They do everything, but the rich, they are having a party. There is a big moral question there. If they are evading taxes, then they are snatching away from the poor and the ordinary man all the resources that the government can do to set up a school and to set up a hospital.
I wish you luck with the rest of your investigation. Great job so far. We'll be watching to see what
Thank
else
you.
you guys have to report. Thanks for speaking with me
Thank
today.
you so much for calling us. Thanks.
To receive instant updates on all videos from The Wire, click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon. Pay to support independent journalism. Click the link in the description and choose the amount you want to pay.